Do you know what starvation sounds like? It doesn't growl. It doesn't scream. It counts. Softly. Patiently. I was 8 years old. The winter 9 people died in a snowstorm. That's what the town called it. A storm. But storms don't loosen boiler valves. Storms don't measure portions. Storms don't circle names in red ink. 30 years later, I found the ledger that proved what really happened in that lodge. And the woman who saved us is the same woman who chose who wouldn't survive. My name is Detective Daniel Whitaker, and this is the story of the grandmother who fed us cookies, while she quietly decided which of our parents had to die. I was 8 years old when in winter the mountain tried to swallow our town. That's how people describe it now, like the storm was the villain. They're wrong. The snow started on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the road out was gone. By Friday night, the power failed. The lodge became our ark. I remember the smell more than anything: wet wool, burning kerosene, and chocolate chip cookies. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore baked them in the old iron oven in the back kitchen. She said, warm food kept fear from settling in your bones. Everyone loved her. She had silver hair pinned in a bun so tight it never moved. She wore a red cardigan with wooden buttons shaped like little pine cones. She called every child sweetheart. When the wind howled loud enough to rattle the windows, she would kneel in front of us, press a mug of cocoa into our hands, and say, storms don't last forever. My parents believed her. That was their mistake. The first person to disappear was Thomas Bell. They said he'd stepped outside to check the generator and never came back. There were footprints leading away from the lodge. It's just one set. The storm swallowed them by morning. The adults whispered. The children were told not to worry. Mrs. Whitmore baked cookies that night. She counted us before she handed them out. I remember that clearly. She counted us every time. The second death was called an accident, a fall on the icy back steps. The third was carbon monoxide from a faulty boiler valve, then a heart attack, then another exposure incident when someone tried to hike home. Each time, Mrs. Whitmore fed us first. Children at one table, adults at another. Children got thicker soup, bigger portions. She'd smile softly and say, growing bodies need strength. I didn't know then what she was measuring. When the plows finally reached town 5 days later, there were 9 fewer adults than when the storm began. The official report blamed weather, panic, and infrastructure failure. Mrs. Whitmore was hailed as a hero. They said her calm leadership saved the children. Saved me. My parents were buried before spring thaw. I became a homicide detective because of that winter. People think trauma pushes you toward revenge. Hey, that's not true. It pushes you toward answers. And answers are colder than revenge. 30 years later, an audit of historical town records flagged inconsistencies in storm-related death certificates. I volunteered to review them. No one stopped me. No one wanted to touch it. The lodge was abandoned by then. Boarded windows, clapped porch, snow always drifting against its foundation like it was trying to reclaim it. The rocking chair still sat by the front window. That's where she'd watch the storm. That's where she'd sip cocoa with us. I stood there for a long time before I walked into the kitchen. The iron oven was rusted. The pantry door hung crooked. And behind a loose panel in the shelving, I found it, a ledger, wrapped in wax paper, dry, preserved. The handwriting was neat, controlled, careful. Columns labeled, calories, remaining population count, projected survival days. Below that, names. Beside each name, numbers. Estimated caloric consumption per day. Medical conditions, dependents. Under a heading titled Necessary Reduction. My father's name was circled in red ink. Asthma, increased caloric strain, high-risk liability. My mother's name was underlined. Insulin dependent, resource intensive. There was no emotion in the notes. Just math. At the bottom of the first page, if reduced to 41 individuals, children survived 12 days. And beneath that, children must remain priority. I kept reading. Entry after entry. Storm, day 1. Storm, day 2. Storm, day 3. Thomas Bell, diabetic. Removal increases margin. Boiler valve adjustment. Risk contained. Sedatives administered to minors. Prevent hysteria. I remembered the cocoa tasting sweeter that night. I remember feeling heavy, sleepy, safe. She drugged us so we wouldn't wander, so we wouldn't see. God, the carbon monoxide report that killed my mother. The valve had been deliberately loosened. Fingerprints weren't processed back then. They didn't look for murder in a blizzard. They looked for survival stories, and she gave them one. I interviewed the few survivors still living. Most refused to speak on record. One finally said what the rest wouldn't. We suspected, but our children were alive. That was the trade. 9 adults for 17 children. No one wanted to calculate whether the food would have lasted without the killings. No one wanted to ask if rationing would have been enough, because if the answer was yes, then they'd have to live with something worse than grief. They'd have to live with choice. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore died at 93, peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by framed photographs of town festivals, school plays, winter carnivals. There's one photo of me at 8 years old. I'm holding a mug of cocoa, kneeling beside me, smiling like she hung the stars herself. Officially, I ruled it posthumous homicide. The paperwork is sealed. The town requested discretion. I granted it. You might think that makes me weak. It doesn't. It makes me practical. 'Cause if I tear down her statue in the town square, if I publish the ledger, if I expose every calculated death, what happens to the children she saved? What happens to me? I visit my parents' graves every winter. They're buried beneath tall pines that creak when the wind moves through them. Last year, during the first snowfall, I brought the ledger with me. I read their names aloud. I told them the truth. Then I locked it away again, not to protect her, but to protect what little innocence survived that storm. There's one question that keeps me awake. Not whether she killed them. She did. Not whether she believed she was right. She did. The question is this: if she hadn't chosen, who would die? Would I be standing here? Would any of us? Snow doesn't answer. Just keeps falling. Soft, quiet, covering everything. And sometimes, when winter settles in and the world turns white, I swear I can still smell chocolate chip cookies drifting through the cold air. And I don't know whether that memory is comfort or a warning.